for, for many years and have interviewed um, both in the traditional format and in the multi-mini interview format as well. I have retired from that now, so I can give you a very objective description of what it entails. So, what is a multi-mini interview? So, when you are in medical school, you are going to find that every project that you start with has to begin with a background. So, let me give you a little bit of background about where this all came from. It was first piloted in 2001 at McMaster University's Michael DeGroote School of Medicine, which is in Ontario, Canada. Prior to that, almost all medical schools use a traditional interview format where you would send in your application, it would be reviewed by a committee. If they deemed you academically sound, they would send you an invitation, and then you would meet with one or possibly two faculty members for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. And that was it. The use of the MMI was introduced mainly to mitigate the bias of the traditional interview because not everybody gets along. And if you happen to have an interviewer that you didn't click with, it really hurts your chances of being accepted to the school. The traditional interviews are still used by many, if not most, medical schools, but they started to implement this multi-mini interview, and the trend is growing. More and more schools are starting to use that in conjunction with a traditional interview and frequently with a group interview. So I've told you a little bit about what a traditional interview, a group interview can be a number of different things. So the group interviews can be one applicant with a panel of interviewers. It can be a group of applicants with one or more interviewers. It can be a group of applicants who are assigned a task to do, say in a half an hour, and the interviewer, if you want to call them that, watches to see how well your team communicates with each other and how well you perform the task that is assigned. The multi-minty, yeah, sorry, I'm going to go back to MMIs because it's easier to say. The MMIs are usually a series of short interview stations that are scenario-based. They have a little bit different timing depending on what school you're at, so you need to pay attention to the instructions that they provide you in terms of the timing. Things are a little different now where most schools are interviewing virtually still. After COVID in the past, you had to travel, you had to pay a lot of money, you had to put on a nice suit and go in and try to impress everybody. But nowadays, it's pretty much done online, which is far more equitable for people who can't afford to do all of that traveling. And what happens is that you are usually brought into a large group room on Zoom, and you are welcomed, and they give you a little bit of instruction on how the MMI is going to function. Most interviews will have a 2-minute time period for you to read the instructions on the scenario that you are about to do. And so it's a good idea to bring with you a pad of paper and a pencil so that you can just jot down some bulleted points while you are reviewing that scenario. Read it carefully so that you see what it is that they are actually asking you to discuss. So you'll have sometimes 2.5 minutes to review what that is, and then you are going to enter a breakout room with your interviewer. It's really important. The first thing that you do is to introduce yourself. You shouldn't go into any detail other than your name. That's it. You don't have to tell them what school you're coming from. They are doing this blinded. They have not seen your application. But what they do know is that you have been vetted by the admissions committee academically. So they know that your GPA, your MCAT scores are in line with what is needed for admission to that particular medical school. So you can take a little bit of a deep breath and say, okay, I'm okay there. And now you've got to try to show them who you are as a person and show off a little bit of your what they call soft skills. So you'll read your scenario, you'll take a few notes, you go in and you start to discuss the scenario with your interviewer. They are looking for a number of different qualities in these interviews. So they're not really technically what you would consider like a traditional interview. They are looking for a number of different things. So let's start. The critical thinking. That is one of the biggest things that they are looking for. They want to be able to see if you can, from that scenario, come up with something to discuss. They want to see and hear your thought process and how you're going to organize your approach to addressing whatever the situation may be. So in this case, it's really a good idea to sort of think out loud. And that may sound a little bit strange, but that's what they want to see. They want to see how your brain is working and how you are approaching this this scenario. So one of the other things that I want to mention is there are no right or wrong answers to these scenarios. And again, they're trying to find out who you are, what your personality is like, and things like your critical thinking. Next would be your communication skills. How well are you able to provide an organized, coherent response to that prompt that touches on everything and yet is succinct? You want to try to avoid rambling and too many ums and ers, which I do all the time. So do as I say, not as I do. They're looking at interpersonal skills. Are you making eye contact with the interviewer over your Zoom? That's sometimes hard to do, especially in this case where my camera can't come on for some reason. But you want to smile. You want to appear as relaxed as you possibly can. And they do expect you to be nervous. What they don't want to see is arrogance. They want to see how well you can demonstrate working in a team or collaborating with others, which you're not doing in that interview, but you would say if your scenario said something where you had to interact with other team members, you want to talk about those team members and how you would bring them into the scenario, how you would interact with them, and just your respect for the other team members. You want to show compassion and empathy for the situation that is described in your scenario. And you want to be able to demonstrate your kindness and your support of the person and empathy by putting yourself in their shoes. You want to be able to show your own personal qualities of growth and development. Some of these scenarios are going to be about asking you to discuss things such as your failures or your weaknesses or something that you had wished you had done differently. And so none of us is perfect, but they want to hear your stories about yourself and situations where you may have struggled and how you recognized the difficulty and what you did to overcome it and what you learned moving forward. They want to be able to see that perhaps you listened to a mentor and you took constructive feedback. Another thing that they're going to be looking for in some of these multi-meeting interviews is your awareness of social issues. So it's not a bad idea for you to go and review in general, nothing specific, about some healthcare policy. Do you know what the Affordable Care Act is? You're not expected to know the answers to all of the things, but if you are interviewing at a medical school in, say, California, do you know what the laws are in California in general? And this comes up particularly with ethical questions, such as the hot topic issues of abortion, contraception, and end-of-life care. So again, there are no right or wrong answers, and you want to bring your experiences to the table, your background. Again, think out loud why you are making the points that you are making. You are also always, always, always able to ask questions. So if you take that 2 minutes to read the scenario and then you go into the room and you really don't understand exactly what it is that they're asking for, it is fine for you to go in and say that. Ask for a little bit of clarification. And if you still don't get it, ask for a couple of minutes or ask for a moment, if you will, to think about it more so that you can try to get your thoughts in order so you're not rambling. You're generally going to go through 5 to 8 different stations, and each one of them is going to be completely different. You don't know who you are interviewing with. They, like you, will introduce themselves only by name in most cases. So they could be a faculty member, they could be a more senior medical student, they could be a resident, a fellow, a patient, one of the basic science faculty. There are a number of different people in different roles who participate in these. And that is, again, to mitigate the bias and get multiple impressions of you as an applicant. Okay. So again, you want to read your scenario, jot down some notes, come in, introduce yourself, be confident, not cocky, and then ask your questions if you have any. Your time to speak with that interviewer is anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes. And in most cases, they will give you a 1 or 2 minute warning. State your understanding of the key points for discussion, confirm that that's correct. And then talk about those key points from your perspective. And then from another perspective, can you look at it from different perspectives? And then can you make a decision as to which avenue you would take and why? So if you have personal experiences that are pertinent to the situation that is being discussed, use those. You can say, this is how I was raised and how I grew up. Can I give an example of a scenario? Yes, I can. I'm going to flip through a little bit here. Okay. Whoops, sorry. All right. So I'm going to go back up. Sorry. Okay. First scenario, let's say this the scenario reads, you are an insurance investigator, and Joe Smith has been out on disability for the last 3 weeks. And the insurance company thinks that he doesn't need to be out on disability anymore. And so you've been assigned to observe him and then make your suggestion as to whether he does or does not need to continue with disability. He was out on disability for a back injury. And you see him, and he is taking something that looks pretty heavy out of the trunk of his car. And he doesn't look like he's in pain. He looks like he's doing okay. And he then proceeds to go into his house. And now you're supposed to discuss that. And I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, if you can just take your, unmute, if you will, and ask your questions, because sometimes these can be pretty vague. But that is a scenario that I had several times. And I'm going to give you an example of how people answered it. One person came in and said, yeah, he's done. He's milking the system. He's obviously doing just fine. And he was able to lift that heavy lawnmower out of his trunk. And so I would recommend that he be done with his disability benefits. And that was all this applicant said. Another one came in and said, it's possible that that he doesn't need them, but we don't know the context of what's going on. Did he go to get that lawnmower out of the car because his elderly mother really needed him to do it? And then he spent the rest of the day on the couch in pain, taking medication, and had trouble getting up the next morning. And so you've got to try to look at it in as many different perspectives as you can. And I think one of the things that they always want to see is seek first to understand, okay? You don't always know what the situations are. And so you always want to give the benefit of the doubt to the patient in the scenario if you can. Another scenario example would be to say, let's see, you work in a clinic and you are a medical student working in this clinic, and you need, and your attending physician has said, oh, there's going to be lunch served today. The pharmaceutical companies are coming. They're going to bring lunch. They're going to talk about their products. And so if you want a free lunch, show up. So discuss what you think the relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and physicians should be. That's another quick little scenario. And you don't need to know what the actual rules are because they are different in every place. But you need to, again, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? If you think it's one or the other, why? Another scenario might be, tell me about a time when you were working with a team and you had a conflict with one of those team members, and how did you handle it? And I'm going to go back to okay, I'm going to say your name wrong, I'm sure. Paria? You can.
Yeah, that's correct. It's Perea. Yeah, sorry about
Okay.
that.
How do you approach answering the pharmaceutical medicine industry question is, well, have you ever been in a situation like that? If you've, observed in a clinic and you may have gone to a free lunch that was sponsored um, by a drug rep, did you see any coercion on the part of the drug rep trying to make sure that the attending or the clinic staff is purchasing their product or that they are prescribing those products to their patients? Are they taking big gifts in return for prescribing their medications? And so just looking at it some people will say, absolutely, there should be no interaction whatsoever. And then other people will say it needs to be monitored and only in certain circumstances. Or you've got a representative, company that has a new piece of equipment that's used in the operating room, and they want to come in and show you how it is used. But in the process, they also want to buy you lunch. And so I'm going to ask you, Priya, do you think that that is ethical?
Um, I might be like wrong because like I still trying to understand the question. Like the previous question was a little bit clearer to me, but this one, so like let me just ask the question first to see if I got it right. So is the question asking about if the physician is right to just go there and then just eat the lunch and not like care about like the products that they have? Is that like what we're trying to answer?
That again, this is a place where you could ask that of your interviewer, because some people will say that's exactly what it's about, and other people will say, no, you've got to look at the more nuanced situation.
Okay.
And so really it's, again, if you've had experience with it, it's great. I was working with a student recently who um, has a part-time job in a clinic, and he's been to many of those luncheons, and felt very uncomfortable about it only in the last instance that he had been there, because the drug rep was there and was pushing a product um, to everybody. This is the best product. You've got to sell this. You've got to, prescribe it to your patients. Hey, you kids who are going into med school, this is the product you're going to be prescribing when you get out. And that is a questionable tactic, if you see what I mean.
No, I totally get it. Like I feel like the way that I would answer it, I don't have that kind of experience, but I'm a research assistant in the hospital right now, and I think the way that I would answer is that I would not force myself to go just for the free lunch and then advertise for like the company, but I would say it like I would definitely want to like inform people about the products that we have. And like clearly I just wanted to help the patient. I don't want to force them or I just don't want to go there for the free lunch. But my intention is something else. My intention is just to advertise for what we have and what are the benefits. Maybe I still am a little bit confused about the question, but that's how I would answer it if I don't get
Actually,
it.
that is a good approach. That is a very good approach. Ultimately, what you want to show is that you are thinking about the patients. You're not thinking about the money end of the business, if you will.
Yes.
And how you can put those things together. So obviously, drug representatives need to sell their products. Physicians need to buy different products. But the question is, how is that best achieved? And are there situations where um, it may not be a correct way to do it, in your opinion? So again, there's no right and no wrong answers here. Okay. I'm going to move on a little bit. So you have done your talking, made your points, you include personal experiences if you have them, you take a stand on what you think you would do, you summarize everything, and then your time is up. It goes very, very quickly. And you thank your interviewer and you move on. And you may or may not get more than a minute before you start in on the next station. So it's kind of rapid fire. But the benefit is if you feel like you didn't do all that great with one person, it's only one of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of the applicants, of the interviewers rather, and not your only chance. So a couple of do's and don'ts, if you will. First, be yourself. And this is really important in the traditional interview, in the MMI as well. You want to show them who you are and that you are not just like everybody else. What are your strengths? What's your personality? Are you somebody that they would like to be on call at 2 o'clock in the morning with? Be prepared when you go. And how do you prepare for an MMI? It's hard because you don't know what's coming, but there are dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of sample questions that you can look online. You can just Google multi-mini interview questions and you can come up with dozens of them. It's really important to be on time, even though it's online now most of the time, and you may wind up having technical issues. It is super important to be on time. And if you have a technical problem, reach out and contact somebody and let them know about it and then apologize for it. Don't just show up 5 minutes late and ignore it. Okay. You still need to dress professionally. And some people think that just means they only have to do the top half because that's all that's going to show up on the screen. But there are interviewers who will ask you to stand up because they have found that people are in their pajama bottoms. And so be prepared to act and dress as professionally as you can. Make sure that your microphone and video are working and that you've got enough light. I came on this one and I've never had a problem with my camera not working before, and I don't know why it didn't work, and we didn't have enough time to troubleshoot it. So again, do as I say, not as I do. Some of the don'ts. Don't make up anything you don't know. You are far better off to say you don't know something, you need clarification, you need time to compose your thoughts, than you are to just start rambling and not making a whole lot of sense, or B, talking about something you really don't know about like you do, because you will be caught up in that. If there's anything in your application that is less than stellar, don't blame anybody else for it. Take ownership of it. It is important to address and tell people what you've learned from it. And one of the MMI stations frequently is a mini traditional interview where it's like, tell me about yourself. And that is not just a recitation of your CV. It is really a time for you to tell them who you are, where you grew up, who your family is, what are the things, what values are important to you. And if you failed the MCAT the first time around, what you did to prepare for the second time around. If you applied to medical school before and didn't get in, what did you learn from that? And how did you prepare to be applying for the second time? The vast majority of students don't get in on the first time. They do on the second, sometimes the third time. So it's often persistence that pays off and learning from the mistakes. The other thing is make sure you do not have your phone on while you're doing the interview, because that is a disaster. You should be able to talk about anything that is in your interview, anything at all. They may, you can bring up if you've done any research while you're in college, and there is a scenario that deals with research, you can talk about your project and how it relates to that particular scenario. These, even though they are scenario driven, they're still conversations, and they should include your personal experiences, your personal stories. And you should definitely try to do mock interviews and get constructive feedback from other people. If you have friends who've already applied and gotten into medical school, then ask them, see if you could do it with them. If you've got a faculty mentor, if you need a coach, I'd be happy to do that. And you need to practice, 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 because even though you may think of a question, so I started to say in one of those examples, think of a time when you were on a team and you had a conflict with a member of the team. What did you do about it? And what did you learn from that experience? So in something like that, you can think that question through and have a pretty good idea in mind of what you would like to say. But that doesn't mean it's going to come out your mouth the way you think it's going to until you've actually spoken the words. So try it. And try it again and try it again. All right. Excuse me. You don't want to be giving canned responses. So even though there are all those dozens of practice questions, you don't want to look like you're just that you've practiced it and practiced it and practiced it, and there's no personality behind it. And when you are going through some of these scenarios where they're asking you to determine a situation, is this a good thing or a bad thing, or would you do it differently type of thing, think through it out loud. Think through it out loud so they can see where your brain is going. You're going to be nervous. That's perfectly normal. It is expected. But even though it's expected, you're going into a profession that you will need to be decisive and need to make some pretty quick decisions. So they want to see that you are able to call on the resources that you have, or, say, I don't know the answer to this, but this is where I would look for the information, or I would go to an attending physician and ask these questions to get more information, or I would ask the patient these questions to get more information. And so they can hear how you are considering the question. And medicine is really a team sport, and it's not done in isolation. Okay. I'm going to give you another couple of examples, if I may, of a scenario. And I'd like others to join in if they can. So here's the scenario. During your first semester of medical school, your anatomy team, which is 5 students to 1 cadaver, is holding a review session on Thursday night. The big midterm for this exam is on Friday. Your cousin's wedding is that weekend. It's out of town, and you had planned to attend, and you were planning on leaving Thursday and coming back on Sunday. What would you do? Anybody want to volunteer? Some thoughts on what they might do?
So I would say that I would communicate with the team members, um, and see what they think, like if there's any way maybe I could do the work early before leaving, or if they had any ideas about some other options I may have. And if nobody comes up with anything else, of course, I would prioritize my academic responsibility. Um, and yeah, that's kind of the gist of what I would say.
Okay, it's good. You are looking for alternative solutions, and I think that's a really good idea. The other thing would be to, for example, suppose this wedding is, a cousin that you grew up with who you're very, very close to, and that you come from a culture where the wedding is an incredibly important family event. And your whole family expects you to be there. Is there a situation where you would not prioritize the review session, but looking for alternatives, speaking to your anatomy professor, speaking to your study group, your cadaver group, all of those things um, are good things to think about.
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question I would have would be, um, where was the academic responsibility or the wedding attendance scheduled first? Maybe that's something I would take into consideration. And so it would kind of be like that thing that I already committed to this. And so
Yep,
that kind of,
exactly.
yeah.
And that's a good point, because you are a person of your word. You made a commitment, and this was scheduled before you knew about the review session. So again, explaining your thought process and how you're coming to these decisions is really important. So that was very good. Another question. What's the most difficult thing you have tried to teach someone, and what was the outcome? Anybody want to try? Hmm. This is actually a pretty common one. So
Um,
don't be surprised if this one comes up.
and just to make sure the question was, what was the most difficult thing I've ever taught someone?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the proper way to approach it, but I'm just gonna try. Um, so once, while working as a medical assistant, I had to train a newer employee that we just onboarded, and they were a bit nervous with working with younger children in the clinic and like administering allergy tests for infants.
Mm-hmm.
And so in general, being able to administer one of these tests was relatively simpler for more adults who understand the process, and getting to that learning curve of being able to work with younger children was definitely a challenge. I first sat down with her and kind of wanted to know which parts kind of stressed her out, and like how we could work through certain parts of this testing procedures so that she would feel more comfortable when um like doing it on her own. And through that, we were able to first, I was able to guide her slowly through each part of the testing procedure, and slowly she was able to pick it up on her own. After observing me a few times and then having me walk her through it as she did it herself, and being able to provide feedback to her each step of the way.
That's a really good answer. It's a very good answer.
Thank you.
The thing is, when you try to teach somebody something, and you will be teachers. That's what doctor is all about. You are a teacher, and you will be forever. And learning how to teach can be very, very challenging. And it's easy to put it off on, well, they're not a good learner, or they're not very receptive. And sometimes you just have to keep trying until you find a way that works. And bringing in that other person, the way you were saying, and getting like a shared decision making on how to go about it is really excellent.
question. So I've heard for MMIs to keep it concise so that the interviewer could ask like follow-up questions.
That's correct.
And I've also heard that it's like good to connect it back to medicine, I think. So was that something that I would do for like every single situation or
No.
depending on the situation? Okay.
No. No, you don't have to always bring it back to medicine.
Mhm.
If you can, and it's a logical connection, then
Uh-huh.
definitely that makes
Okay.
sense. But don't go stressing yourself out trying to say, this is how it relates to my training as a future physician, because that's not the main point of it.
Uh-huh. Thank you.
One other quick example. So some states have expanded their Medicaid programs to cover all people with household incomes below a certain level. Other states haven't. Please discuss your opinions on Medicaid expansion. So this is information. Medicaid expansion has been in the news a fair amount. I am currently in North Carolina, and North Carolina didn't expand for a long time, and they finally did. So there's been a lot of discussion. I know a lot of college students aren't particularly interested in Medicare expansion protocols, but again, this is a fairly common topic and one that they would assume you might know. But if you don't, if you were to get that as a scenario, your first step would be to say, I don't really know that much about Medicaid expansion. I've never interacted with that. I've never really heard about it, and get some more information before you launch into an answer. All right, questions that you have.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
So sometimes it feels like some of these topics can be a little political,
Yes,
such as
they
like
can.
such as like if we're asked about abortion, and I'm specifically from Texas, and so I feel like for a lot of med schools in which I may be interviewing at, there may be physicians who may not share the same beliefs as me. So just kind of curious how you approach that, where you like still take a stance, but maybe don't leave the wrong impression on the interviewer. Yeah.
It is a tricky situation, and some schools do it intentionally because they want to see how much you squirm and how much you give the answer you think they want to hear. And so again, I'm going to go back to saying, be yourself. Talk about your background, talk about your values. One of the big values that you should all have is you want to do what is best for your patient. And abortion is it is a hot topic. And since I primarily worked in OBGYN for the last 3 decades, it's one I am really familiar with. And you can say, I was raised this way. I was raised that this is a sin and you shouldn't end life, and but I would confer with my patient. I would confer with other team members. If she wanted me to confer with her pastor or whatever the case may be, we would do a team effort to make a decision in each individual case, because you're looking to protect the health of your patient. You have to work within the constraints of the laws in each of those states, and it's very tricky. But if you are pro-choice, you can say you're pro-choice and why you are. And if you were to go to that school and it was not allowed in that state, then you would say you would practice under the laws of the state, but these would be your opinions. And that is okay, because not everybody in those states necessarily agree. You know, I came from Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is very, very, very pro-choice. But we had applicants who would come in and say they were absolutely pro-life, would never do an abortion under any circumstances, but then would give their reasoning why. And I think one of the things that you have to be really cautious with is making statements where there's no room for compromise or no room for listening to other opinions. There is, it's not black and white. And you have to be able to work through that. And in many situations, you're working through it with your patient, your attending physicians, with the legal department, with risk management. You know, it's not a cut and dried thing where one person makes the decision and that's it. So I hope that helps. But I would stick to your own story and be true to yourself. Anybody else? Okay. Kristen, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Don't have any additional questions, we can wrap up. But yeah, if we have a few more minutes of this scheduled event, if anyone else.
All right. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that we still had time. I am more than happy to take questions. And if you would like to do an intro call with me for future coaching possibilities, I would look forward to that as well. No obligation, right? And just talk and see if we meet.
Sorry. I had a few questions about your coaching services. Do you kind of do a mock and feedback or general tips, or what kind of services do you provide for mock interviews?
Okay, so because I was doing this with you know, actual students in my job for a long time, it was a little bit of everything. Now that I am retired from my job and doing this for coaching only, what I have been doing so far, and I am very new to this, to be honest with you, is that I asked the student, what are you looking for? Most recently, I had a student where we spent a session doing traditional mock interviews and providing feedback, then a session doing a series of multi-mini interviews and giving feedback, and then a session where we did a group interview and giving feedback, and then we just had a final, you know, wrap it up session and see how he did. And he was terrific. I mean, he took feedback and he took it really well, and that is hugely important. And I could see the progression over a series of our short meetings, and could see his growth. I think he's going to do just fine. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, that's great. I like that better because I think it's more realistic and it can give you a better sense of where you stand.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, please.
Sure.
Hi, and thank you for the presentation. My name is Jessica. So I came here. I mean, it's very useful. I really like your approach and everything, but I am going for dental school, so I'm not sure if I can still have a session with you or something.
For dental school?
Yes.
Sure. They're not that different. And to be honest with you, one of my very, very good friends is a member of the dental school faculty at UNC and is on their admissions committee. So I've got some good intel from him. But the process is very similar.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
I'm curious as to where all of you are from. You want to just stick it in the chat, what part of the country you're from? Ah, you are all over the place. Look at that. Boston, woo-hoo. North Carolina. Oh, the person in North Carolina, I hope you weren't flooded. Same with the Florida people. Wow, you are. This is great. I love it. Love it. Well, if you don't have any more questions, then I think I'll give you your time back. But I am always happy to do an intro call and you can figure out whether you want to talk to me or you don't want to talk to me or you want to talk to somebody else. I think you are headed towards a phenomenal career that is going to be incredibly hard. You are going to work your butt off and it will be the most rewarding thing that you ever do. So I wish you all the luck in the world. And thank you for listening. All good, Kristen?
Yeah, thanks everyone for hopping on. We will email you all the recording if you had to join late. And yeah, there's a link to schedule intro calls with Ty in the comments or in the chat. So thanks everyone.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure.